Hello, everyone, and welcome to Education in Focus, powered by Chalkboard News. I'm Dan McCaleb, Vice President of News and Content at the Franklin News Foundation, which publishes chalkboardnews.com. Chalkboard is a news website dedicated to issues related to K-12 education. Joining me again today is Chalkboard's K-12 editor, Brendan Clary. How are you, Brendan?
I'm doing well, Dan. How about yourself?
Doing well, thank you. We are recording this on Monday, October 23rd. Brendan, school districts and state governments have been debating for more than a year now the age appropriateness of certain books that either are or are not available in school libraries across the country. It's been such a controversial topic that a congressional committee got involved and held a hearing on the matter late last week. You covered the hearing for Chalkboard News, Brendan. Tell our listeners about it.
Yeah, so it's the Subcommittee on Early Childhood, Elementary, and Secondary Education, which is a huge mouthful. And I think it's part of a committee on like the workforce education in the House of Representatives, right? And so it was a time to hear about the different opinions on book removals, which is what advocates of moderation call it. Opponents usually call it a book ban. I think I wrote about that in the piece. Is there's sort of a difference of opinion in what these are, right? So there's a lot of talk about book bans, book removals, and I think that the people who are advocating for sort of a content moderation and making sure that students don't have access to explicit material. They would call it a book removal. They're saying, it's not illegal to go out and buy this with your own money. It's not illegal to even go to like a public library and be able to check this out, but just not in schools or, having taxpayer money go to funding explicit material. That's what they would argue. Those on the other side, they argue, usually advocacy groups for free expression or for different teacher groups, that kind of thing. They often say, look, these are book bans, and they'll say, students should be able to read whatever they want, especially those stories that reflect their different identity, sort of characteristics, those kinds of questions. And so they take issue with removing content that maybe contains alternate sexuality characters or that kind of thing. And so that's on the other side of like, we need to be able to let children read whatever they want, essentially. And who are we to say, kind of stand in the way? And that the problem is that there is that they would say when you have people who are ideologically driven telling students what they can and can't read. And so I think that that's sort of the juxtaposition there. So as you know, the House of Representatives, we've had a lot written about the speaker, but it is, Republican majority there. So the subcommittee, I believe, is, Republican majority, so they can pick what they're hearing on. And that's sort of one question that I had when going into it is, what is the federal government's role in that? And that's something that came up, right, is what should the federal government do? What should Congress do about this?
Right. Usually when it comes to schools, you think that, these are local decisions, right? School districts, school boards, elected school boards and local communities, they know what's best for their children. But now states are getting involved in these discussions, states looking at statewide legislation to either remove certain books from libraries or to mandate that schools can't remove books from libraries. And there was even complaints about that, hey, this should be local decision. And now Congress is getting involved. So did you hear at the hearing?
Yeah, so what I heard pushback from some of those who were testifying. They said, what is they were, questioning or, basically said that the federal government should not really play a role in, saying what states or local districts should or should not have in their libraries, and that is something that, should stay at that local level there. But, the Representative Aaron Bean, the committee chair, he slammed the Biden administration's efforts to sort of mandate or to tie funding to book bans. So there was, as we reported last month, an appointee from the Biden administration specifically for book removals, right, to look into that and to be in charge of that. And the Office of Civil Rights at the Education Department, they have gone on the record for Chalkboard, for other sources, that they will hold federal funding. That would be sort of the ultimatum for these school districts that violate, what they see as sort of I'm trying to remember the exact language, but essentially, if you remove these books, if you ban these books, and that would be their language, then you're creating like a hostile learning environment. It would run afoul of the federal, guidelines, and will remove your funding. So essentially, if you do this, then this will happen. We'll remove your funding. So I think that's a federal sort of response, and that's something targeted by Representative B in there. So it sort of puts a spotlight on the divide in the country, right? That we have so many people saying we don't want this in our school library, and then another half of the country saying, some other vocal opponents saying, no, we want students to be able to read whatever you want, and parents can talk with their children and sort of create those guide rails themselves.
One of the big arguments for local control on these matters involving schools, for example, is that this presidential administration is doing what you just said, threatening to withhold funding from schools that remove books, age inappropriate or not, from libraries. There's a presidential election every 4 years. What if whoever, the Republican, gets elected president? We both know that Donald Trump is the front runner on the Republican side in the presidential primary. He gets into office and then he changes the rules. And then the next president 4 years later gets in there and he changes local rules. So school districts, regardless of where they are in the country, regardless if they're in a more progressive area or a more conservative area, they're having to go back and forth each time. So that creates issues there. You referenced the speakership fight in the House. They don't have a speaker, and they haven't had a speaker for more than a couple of weeks now. So at this point, anyway, even if this committee recommended something, it's not like anything's going to happen in the full House. What do you see is Congress going to stay involved in this? Do you see anything coming out of this, or was this really a meeting for both sides to share their arguments?
Yeah, I kind of see it more as let's talk about this, and with a lot of these subcommittees and a lot of committees in general, there's some amount of grandstanding, right, of a politician saying, hey, I talked about this, or this is we got something done today, and I think it's sometimes a way to sort of talk about an issue and maybe glean more information. But I think the hard part about that is it's hard to define what the federal government's response would be on this issue. And I think it's also, going to be very difficult, as you mentioned, to find some kind of consensus over this. So I think it's going to keep coming up, maybe not in Congress as much, but, in local school board meetings for sure.
Thank you for your insight, Brendan. This is a story that, as you mentioned, will not go away anytime soon. We will continue to cover it at chalkboardnews.com, where our listeners can keep up with any updates. But we are out of time. For Brendan Clary, I'm Dan McCaleb. Please subscribe. Thank you for listening.